The second to last movie in the DCEU before it gets shipped off to the glue factory has finally hit theaters and is already breaking records as the least amount of money a movie has ever made. I think if we didn't come off the back of two pretty mediocre or divisive movies with Shazam 2 and The Flash, then audiences would have been a lot nicer to this and more willing to go see it. But the marketing just wasn't there, and unfortunately what will probably be the best DC movie of the year is also going to severely underperform at the box office. Sounds like a pretty mean opening, but the reason I'm being so straight with it is because I'm sad. Because this movie is actually pretty good, and I don't think it deserves to make $0. Hot take, Michael's gonna be nicer to a superhero movie than the rest of society is. Wah wah. It doesn't do anything particularly new, and believe it or not, I wouldn't even say it's in my top DCEU movies so far, but I think the movie just has a ton of heart, and I would easily watch a sequel. The best part of the movie is far and away Jolo Maridueña as Jaime Reyes. He really grabbed me in the emotional scenes and the regular day-to-day scenes. He was just very easy to root for, and he was just a very charming actor. The rest of the family is also great and believable. George Lopez had me dying in the theater. I know, huh? If you don't know, this movie has a pretty weird history. It was meant to be a movie released solely on HBO Max, like Batgirl. So it had a pretty low budget, and you can see it sometimes. It doesn't always look super expensive. It does oftentimes look like the Max Steel commercial from the early 2000s. But I was surprised that other times it looked really good. I think it shows that they did their homework and that they wanted to make a movie that was worthy of the character. They put a ton of attention into Jaime and his family relations and their Mexican heritage. It's not something that's mentioned in one scene. They're constantly speaking Spanish or Spanglish, and we're always reminded of who Jaime is and his family and what their roots are. Even like down to the set design of the house that they live in has a lot of care and attention put into it, so that later scenes can feel a bit more impactful. It's a visual way of showing us the history of the family and how much they care for this house. It's pretty early on that they talk about how much they love the house and they're upset that, they might not live in it forever. That kind of attention is something that's missing specifically in Marvel movies now. I think about how in Avengers Endgame, the Avengers HQ is destroyed, but we don't really care because it's not a place that we've been in. It's not a place that we built an emotional attachment to. For the most part, it just looks like an empty warehouse. Whereas maybe if it was like filled with memorabilia and it's where a lot of like iconic scenes happened, like that destruction would be like a devastating blow to the audience and to the characters. Also, some of the action was really fun. The director said that a lot of it was inspired by Injustice combos, and I think that shows. I was glad that I got to see the Scarab do some of the things I was really hoping to see it do, and the suit is just awesome. I think this is a pretty spot-on comic book suit. I think DC, for the most part, has a good track record of almost all their suits, like the Aquaman one and the Peacemaker suit are two of my favorite superhero costumes of all time, and the Blue Beetle one is in that same ballpark. The one thing I didn't really like is more so coming from a comic fan perspective is that they don't really explore the relationship between Jaime and Khaji, who's the scarab that gets put into him. It felt pretty sudden that Jaime was able to control his powers for the final confrontation and didn't necessarily feel maybe as earned as I think it could have. I recently, before this movie came out, read the John Rogers run of Blue Beetle, and that was some of my favorite stuff, was how it kind of felt like Jaime was constantly fighting against the Scarab in some way, and that culminates in this really awesome moment where their bond is solidified and they finally learn to trust each other. Obviously, I wasn't expecting to see all of that. It's not necessarily easy to be a one-to-one translation of that because so much of that comes from the visuals of comic art. For example, like Jaime can't understand Khaji for most of the initial comic run, and it's not until the end that he finally learns to understand it. And that's a very visual thing. Like, it wouldn't really be appealing to have the audience listening to an alien language the whole time, so I get why they didn't do that, but I do think they could have taken other measures to make us see like more of a struggle between Jaime and adapting to this new being that's living in him. The villain was also pretty weak, but that's so common in Marvel and DC movies this day and age that I hardly even thought about it and forgot about the villain entirely until I was writing this. I really liked how much of this movie incorporated Ted Kord and his legacy. It went beyond just a couple Easter eggs here and there, and they talk about him quite a lot. I'm not immune to having fun Easter eggs about, a comic character in there, and I think it was done very tastefully. Blue Beetle's theme was also really fitting and energetic. So yeah, that's about it. I mean, it's disappointing that this movie isn't going to do so hot, but I think, if you're a person who likes Marvel movies and you like DC movies, or, you just like fun kind of science fiction adventure movies in general, then I don't see why you wouldn't like this. If you're a fan of Blue Beetle from the comics, you'll definitely like it. At the very least, you'll walk away loving Jaime and his family, and that's really the most important part. While I am pretty glad to say goodbye to the DCEU and its messy continuity, I'm very glad that James Gunn confirmed that Xolo as Blue Beetle is not going anywhere, and the Blue Beetle Battalion can live on.